just wait for this person to join, hopefully. Maybe not. Maybe I'll just start talking. Great. Yeah, so thank you all for coming and giving up this beautiful evening to be yet again on Zoom, as I'm sure we all spend most of our lives doing this in some format or another. So this is the second in a series of talks which we're hosting through the Food Hall virtual space, but are not sort of necessarily associated with Food Hall, more to do with the wider Sheffield food community, food system. So the first talk that we had was over a month ago now, and it focused on the sort of ways in which the food system integrates into people's lives in various different ways, and how to create a sustainable and just food system, we can facilitate that integration in various different ways. So we heard from Beth, who was working with a group who run an allotment with some refugees and asylum seekers, and we heard from Clem, who works at Regather, which is sort of peri-urban agriculture. We also heard from Hoon, who had been working down in Cornwall on a small growing project that was paired up with some sort of pop-up restaurant type things, and was utilising the sort of veg that wouldn't normally be used to increase yields and things. And it was a really interesting session, and we did a bit of workshopping at the end around what an inclusive growing space might look like. And I emailed out to people afterwards some of the notes that we made from that and some of the different organisations that we spoke about. And so if you weren't at the last session and you would like to see those notes, and I'll probably maybe send out some more stuff after this as well, feel free to pop your email address in the chat. You can send it to me via a private message if you don't want everyone else to be able to see it. And then I can send that out afterwards, and with the recording of this video as well, if you want to see, watch this back and hear it again. Yeah, so that was last time, but tonight I'm super excited to have two speakers with us. We unfortunately were going to have three speakers, but one of them wasn't able to make it quite last minute, which is understandable given the weather. And yeah, so tonight we've got two fantastic speakers, and we're going to be talking about this kind of interplay between practice and academia. So the plan for tonight is that we're going to hear first from Dr. Nicola Dempsey from the Landscape Architecture Department at the University of Sheffield, and then we're going to hear from Professor Hamish Cunningham, also from the University of Sheffield. So I'm not going to give them too much of an introduction because they're going to speak very shortly. And the idea with this session is that we wanted to sort of focus on the fact that in Sheffield we've got these two massive universities, and there's loads of research happening into loads of different things that can engage with our food system. And so when I talk about the food system, I guess what I'm talking about is the whole system going right from field to fork, for want of a less cheesy acronym or less cheesy sort of analogy. We've got loads of stuff going on in the city. We've got urban farms and peri-urban farms, we've got community gardens, we've got community food growing projects, all these various different models, alternative food growing models. And then we've also got all these various food distribution and different kinds of networks that utilise surplus food and various different things. We've got different social eating projects, even like high-end restaurants. We've got everything in Sheffield. There's all sorts of different things going on. And the idea of this talk series is that we sort of think about that whole system and how we can take that into being a sustainable and a just system. And that's the way that Food Hall comes into this, is because that is what Food Hall's goal is. It's to create a sustainable and just food system that combats social isolation and food insecurity and food waste. So I guess without further ado, really, just sort of, the format. I think first we're going to go to Nicola, and then we're going to go to Hamish, and then afterwards we're going to have a bit of a discussion. So yeah, that Nicola and Hamish are both going to present sort of the work that they do, and that it's going to relate to vastly different parts of this system, really, really different things. And then afterwards, we'll have time for a bit of a discussion around this interplay between academia and practice. And I've got a few sort of questions for us to think about there to facilitate that discussion. And so it'd be really great to have your feedback. It'd be really great if while the speakers are talking, you could pop any questions in the chat, and then we can save them up until the end and come back to them. I'm just really excited. So thanks for being here, and I will pass over to Nicola.
Great, thanks, Emmett. I will endeavour to introduce myself while sharing my screen. Let's see if I can do this. So yeah, hi everybody. Make sure I get the right presentation. So I'm Nicola, and tell me if you can see a screen that's got a lot of blue in it, and that has just got a yeah, all looking good. Got my you can't see loads of other slides, you can just see one. That's good. Right, okay, great. I'll stop looking like a complete novice. I work in the Department of Landscape Architecture. I do a lot of research and teaching into the long-term management of urban landscapes, from small pocket parks to, well, up to sort of national park scale, and everything sort of in between that, along that spectrum. And what I thought would be hopefully interesting, possibly useful, would be for me to just sort of share some of the stuff on how I really thought a lot of my work would be about the physical places, the landscape, the gardens, the allotments, the river corridors, whatever it is. But actually, most of my time is focused on trying to understand the processes and the people, the machinations that go on to make all of these places happen. And so I think that I hope that sort of fits into a discussion around the system, as Emmett mentioned. So the kind of the stuff that I write about and have inherited this term, which is called place keeping. It's a lot around this idea of long-term management. And so when a place is created, which might be a garden that gets started up, or it might be a park that is newly created, or some space that's attached to housing, it's sort of made in a very simplistic way. We could almost say it's kind of finished, but actually what happens to keep it going? I think I've actually, if I go to the next slide, this is probably what I'm trying to say here. Places places can't always take care of themselves. We need to understand those processes of what happens afterwards, and that invariably involves a partnership or some kind of system that's got people involved in it, that will be involved in the active management of that place. So just flipping back to that slide, we try and break down this sort of pretty petal thing, saying that when I'm looking at the long-term management of places, these are the sorts of things that we tend to focus on. I'm not going to get into all of this, but just to say that partnership is the thing that I wanted to focus on this evening. So, and why, and part of this is that we've done some work on partnerships. Like I say, it just ended up, even though I was really interested in, I thought I'd be able to get away with just going and visiting lots of places and seeing lots of parks and different types of green spaces. But no, as I say, I think it's quotes like this that really capture what I've been doing. This is sort of calling on some work that I've been doing in Sheffield for quite a few years now. And yeah, I mean, the quote sort of says there's lots of people involved at the beginning of this was about a transformation of a park, but ongoing management, that's trickier. I'd say it's also not as interesting as the sort of the creating of the place, or the putting it all together. Obviously with food growing, that's kind of it is a bit different to something like a park being created, but there's certainly something about trying to really understand where that process can be, I suppose, broken down and understood. And that's where, again, that's where I'm coming from as a researcher. So let me just see if there's anything else. Yeah. So I was kind of, the reason that we were looking at partnerships was both, we were trying to critically see what kind of works in partnerships and what doesn't. So are there things that make a place work really well? Are there others where, or can we find reasons for why a place might be struggling, or why there might be patches of green space around the city that don't have any maybe community group attached to them? We were interested in these sorts of things when we were doing, when I'm doing my research. And the power of partnership, really, I think is it's about that drive towards connecting up, not just the people who feel passionately about a particular place, which might be very small in scale, but also being able to connect with others. And already, the last session that Emmett was talking about was already talking about the different organisations that are involved, and it's that how are they together stronger as a partnership, or are they all, well, are there problems if they're not talking to one another? And so partnerships, and again, a lot of this may sound very common sense to you, or you may be very familiar with how this all works out, but decision makers in the council, for example, or other decision makers looking at funding, dishing out cash, they are more likely to listen to united voices. It can be easier. It can be, you're a set of organisations together can be stronger than individually. And certainly, I know, for example, if the council has 80 or 90 friends groups who are associated with parks or allotment groups, and all of them are talking to the Parks Department, that's going to be much easier if there is one forum or one kind of body that represents them all together. And as long as that as a partnership works and people can get their opinions or their grievances, or their, basically they're working in a transparent and an open partnership, then it allows it allows for a dialogue with the decision makers like the council. Whether that dialogue goes the way that the partners want is another matter, but it's certainly a lot easier, I think, to manage, and having that united voice can be more powerful than lots and lots of individual small groups, perhaps all asking the same question, potentially asking for the same money. So when we were looking at what placekeeping, this long-term management, what does it involve? It also brought up points around what activities are happening. So some of it might be around the kind of idea of facilitating. So that might be about campaigning, that might be about awareness raising, it might be about thinking strategically, but that might be very different. Well, it is very different from the skills and interests that would be involved in, say, delivering placekeeping. So that might be ongoing maintenance, that might be organising events, that might be fundraising. So while there are overlaps, there may be different sets of skills and different sets of interests that people would call on, and they are not all mutually compatible necessarily. And some people will be much more interested in doing some parts of that than others, and that became quite clear for certainly what we were doing, that if people are kind of being pushed into doing what they don't want to do and not playing to their own strengths, then that can be hard. And underlying all of that is this idea of what is it that a partnership is working towards. And again, that might be one small organisation, or it might be a network. In the case of the Sheffield Green Spaces Forum, which just happens to be a group I'm familiar with that represents all the parks community groups in the city. But what are the aims? Is it a shared goal? Is it a common goal that everybody signs up to? Again, it might seem like a very obvious thing to do, but it might not actually be something that anybody has ever written down on paper. And sometimes just being able to try and break down what it is that people think the aims are of a group or of a space can perhaps start to outline where maybe there are gaps between different people's sort of motivations or drivers in getting involved in a partnership. So we as I say, we weren't just looking at how partnerships work really well, because I think that can be good, but I really do believe there's a lot that we can learn from what doesn't work so well in a positive and constructive way. So if we've got an idea that a successful partnership has got a common shared goal, then it's also about sort of identifying what the capacity is without that within that partnership. And I'm involved in a few very different partnerships in different parts of the city, actually, and it is amazing how the capacity is so different in different places. It's not just about the thing that binds everybody together, be that a building, be that a space, be that the scale of the city. It doesn't matter. It's more about some of these things here that are on the slides. Is it about some people not being able to stay in the partnership for very long, so you've got sort of lack of continuity of people working within there or taking part in it. Maybe that the communication might be quite poor. Ultimately, maybe agendas are different, and it might be that people just aren't talking either the same language, or they're not really they're not sharing that common goal, or if they are, they're interpreting it differently. And I think things like that again might seem quite sort of obvious, but I think sometimes there can be a lot of underlying problems that might not be very difficult to fix, but certainly need to be scrutinized to have a look and see where that capacity of a partnership might be kind of a bit problematic. And yeah, equally, good partnerships or things that are working well, it is about high capacity. So it's about people having that drive and motivation to get things done, having a can-do attitude, being willing to be flexible as well. And there's nothing that COVID hasn't taught us more than is about needing to be flexible in all walks of life, for sure. But sometimes doing things the way we've always done them. In fact, that was a common refrain actually when we have talked to different partnerships. Well, we can't possibly do that. It just doesn't fit with the system that we've got already, or we haven't. We can't work things out in that way. Not being willing to change can sometimes put new people off joining a group, but it can also really stymie kind of change and innovation. And some of that can be down to this idea of different priorities. And again, it could just be, well, we've always done it this way. And yeah, that ability to think flexibly doesn't come naturally to everybody. And I include myself in that sometimes. It's not always an easy thing to do. It's also about recognizing not everybody wants to, well, everybody will take part, but in their own way. So not everybody will necessarily want to take an active part, even though they may fully support and sign up to the shared vision, and they may fully support the partnership. Again, there's nothing like asking people to be a trustee or to be a secretary or to be a treasurer or something quite kind of technical and I suppose, well, potentially scary in terms of the perceived responsibility that it brings, that can scare people off, and you sort of realize that you might find yourself alone when you're asking for people for that. So how a group is organized can appeal to some, but it may put other people off. And again, if it's about wanting certain things to be done, is it useful to think about whether you're facilitating or delivering these different activities? But playing to people's strengths and their interests is clearly going to be better than, well, for example, I was recently in a partnership where there was a bit of guilt tripping going on, trying to get people to take on more responsibility and to actually feel that they should be taking on more responsibility. That wasn't working very well, I don't think, and I don't think that is a good, personally, not a very good tactic to take. And just last couple of things to say, you know, having said all that, there is a need for leadership. It doesn't necessarily need to be a chairman or a very formalised position. It really does depend on the group. But obviously, if it's set up as a charity, there are going to be certain things that do need to be done. But it's more about, it can be that coalition of people with a shared common vision. But ultimately, we're starting with things like that sharing of what's going, you know, what the aims are of the group. So my final slide is this one. This was an exercise that we found ended up being quite useful for some groups. I don't know whether this would be of interest or useful for people here, but it was about mapping out very, very simply what who a group works with, who a group maybe should work with as well. So it might be that there are people, organisations who aren't on your radar or who aren't on a group's radar as yet, but also it can be about identifying those gaps as well, thinking about where there may be some really strong links with people, but there may be some that are either weak or they're very informal, or as I say, they're not there yet. So there could be potential links because they're currently non-existent. So that's all really. I'll stop plugging all the stuff that I work on, and I do hope it's been at least interesting. There is other stuff online, and if you want to get in touch with me, then just please do. But that's all from me. Thank you. I'm going to stop. Can I stop? Did that
Thanks
work?
so much, Nicola. Yeah, that was fantastic, and I'm really grateful because I think, I don't know, I don't want to offend you by saying this, but I feel like this kind of thinking isn't always very sexy. It's like, it's on the back foot, you know, isn't it? Like, and yeah, I, as you know, working through Food Hall at the minute, trying to set up some kind of growing project, it's not like what we're thinking about. We're like, oh, let's plant some veg. That's the exciting bit. Or, you know, not even veg, just like trying to get a bit of a garden going or whatever. Yeah, that's the exciting bit. And it's not thinking about how we're set up to do that. But really, in this kind of world where we're trying to think of a radical system in Sheffield that's going to help people, it's going to help nature, it's going to help our food capacity, we're going to have to work together. There's not a whole load of money. We're definitely going to have to work together to share resources. So yeah, this kind of thinking is just really, really helpful. Thanks. So yeah, next I'd like to pass over to Hamish Cunningham, who is going to talk about something completely different, hopefully, just to show how diverse the sort of things that can relate to our food system is. Over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me at the back?
Yep.
In the cheap seats. Great. Try pressing that one. Can you see that? Fantastic. Away we go. What will we eat? I think one of the subtitles for this talk was what will we eat when the shit hits the fan? But I think these days it would have to be when more shits the fan, wouldn't it? I mean, the fan's already covered in. Anyway, what will we eat? I used to invoke various spectres, the ice melting, etc., etc. I used to invoke Trump, the spectre of Donald Trump. He's, oh, thank God, he's a little bit less scary than he used to be, isn't he? But you know, what will we eat if Bojo put Dido in charge of food? Has anybody tried track and trace recently? My daughter's getting tested every 20 minutes for various reasons, school and what have you. And I made the mistake of trying to enter the data on the national system. You put your email in, you ask you to verify your email, you put your email in again. I had a space on the end of it and it rejected it because it wasn't the same as the, you know, the two things weren't the same. I feel completely at home as a professor of computer science telling you it's not too difficult to trim the spaces from the end of an email address. It's not really that difficult. It's probably not worth 37 billion quid or whatever it is we spent on those completely useless wastes of space who are, you know, mates of Bojo. So what does that mean? It means if we're thinking about food, we've got a pretty urgent need for all these sorts of reasons to produce more food that's not at the end of long, vulnerable and polluting supply chains. And we need to produce it as fast and efficiently as we can. In this context, we're talking about trying to produce more food within the city, within Sheffield. So how could we do that? Well, the go-to technique for intensive agriculture these days, agriculture that you can put into unusual spaces, agriculture that you don't need soil as a substrate, is hydroponics. And if you go into Tesco's or the co-op and you buy your tomatoes or your lettuce, then you're probably, at least some of the time, you're buying stuff that's been grown hydroponically. So that's plants where the roots are probably in some kind of koi substrate, and we just pour water over them. In the water, we dissolve fertilizer, we dissolve plant food. It's a mature and highly productive technology. Everybody knows how to do it. You know, if you pop out in the park and have a lovely smell of weed, then it's probably that's been grown hydroponically in someone's basement. If you go into Green Spirit and you buy a bunch of equipment for hydroponics, they reel off. I had this experience a couple of years ago. They reel off carefully big black bin liners, and they offer them to you, and you think, hang on a minute, it's all come packaged up already. I don't need a bin liner to put it in. What they're offering you is a bin liner to hide all the hydroponic equipment that you take home, so that people don't think that you're growing weed in your basement. Well, lots of people are, obviously. There you go. Anyway, off topic. The problem with hydroponics is that fertilizer is rather unsustainable. So either it comes from natural sources like potash, which you know, that we have to dig up. Most of that's gone already. Or we create it with a process, a nitrogen fixation process. Very often the Haber-Bosch process. Now, the amount of energy that you need to do that is massive. And I'm pretty sure it's something like 2% of our entire global energy budget is used for nitrogen fixation. So that's a massive amount of energy that we're using. There's a way, luckily, that we can do intensive agriculture like hydroponics, only more sustainably. And that's what I've been trying to work on for the last 5-6 years, and that I'm telling you about today. And it's the thing called aquaponics. So aquaponics is similarly intensive to hydroponics, but we add fish to the picture. We have a closed loop water circulation system. We have fish and plants and a third mystery organism, which I'll mention in a minute, living in symbiosis. And the fish do what fish do very well. They poo in the water after you've fed them, and it gets translated into plant food, and the plants clean the water for the fish. So we have this kind of virtuous circle. It's quite an old technique. It has antecedents in Inca raft farming and Chinese raft paddies. Basically, we're replacing the fertilizers with organic waste. The fish metabolize food that we give them, and they produce ammonia. And then the third mystery organism comes along. If you create the right conditions, that's basically ammonia-rich environments with both water and air, then you get naturally occurring bacteria that will colonize that environment. And those are nitrifying bacteria that will translate ammonia, they'll translate the fish waste to nitrites and then to nitrates. And nitrates is plant food, so the plants will eat the food and they'll clean the water and it'll go back to the fish. Everybody's happy. It's completely minimalist as far as use of water is concerned, so it's great for environments where water is a problem. In hydroponics, you often get a kind of buildup of chemicals due to the nature of the process, and you have to flush the water away. You can't do that in aquaponics. If you flush the water away, you've killed all your bacteria. The fish are going to die, the plants are going to die. So you have to use as little water as possible. Similarly, if you put pesticides in there to deal with some kind of infestation on the plants, you're liable to kill the fish. If you put growth hormones in to grow your fish faster, you're going to kill the plants or the bacteria. So we end up with this very, very clean, organic type of process that doesn't use pesticides, growth hormones, and all that kind of crap. That was the good news. What's the bad news? What's the catch? Well, there's two really. Cost, okay, the cost is a little bit higher than normal agriculture. It's of a kind of an order of hydroponics. It's a similar cost to starting up a hydroponic system. The real downside is complexity. So we've got this ecosystem, this three-way ecosystem of the plants, the fish, and the bacteria that we have to keep in balance. And that's a complex thing to do. So the research that we've been doing in Sheffield over the past few years is to try and solve that in two ways. So we try to do a bit of wisdom of crowds and citizen science. So we have these little electronic devices for control and monitoring of the systems. They will suck up data from your greenhouse, push it into the cloud, give you a dashboard, try and answer questions like what's going to grow well in Sheffield in October, what is my system doing at the moment, what are the levels of ammonia, what are the levels of nitrates, what's the temperature, how much light are we getting, all those kinds of things. So we're trying to address this complexity problem by adding a bit of automation, essentially, a bit of automation, a bit of knowledge sharing between growers. And then to make it as cheap as possible, we're using designs that do a lot of recycling. We use a design from the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization that was specifically put together so that it used easy to source materials and cheap materials like these IBCs you can see on the bottom left there. We upcycle stuff like toilet systems for water valves or bike tires for water valves. And we're doing everything open, so everything's open hardware and open source software. And we've been doing this for a few years. We had a little demonstrator in the winter gardens. We had a system on the University Concourse. We had one in the controlled environment system, controlled environment labs at the university. Now we're building one at Regather. So this is out the back of Regather on Club Garden. We're building Club Garden mini farm. It's been designed by Mark Parsons at Studio Polpo. It's been funded by the Institute for Sustainable Food, and it's being built by a cast of thousands, including Regather, Shokoi, Pimeroni, Bitfixit. And I've been down there a couple of times to pretend that I'm doing something useful. And basically what we've got is a couple of shipping containers offset, and that's where the fish live. So we've got a nice safe environment for the fish. And then we've got a couple of grow chambers at the sides where we're going to be growing the vegetables. And that's pretty much all I want to talk about. If you want to volunteer, if you want to get involved, you'll be more than welcome. We did actually talk to Food Hall about putting it in your car park out the back. It wouldn't fit in the car park, unfortunately, but we'd love to look into how that collaboration might go in the future. How much can we grow if we do this? Jill Edmondson from Animal and Plant at the university did some lovely research that quantified quite precisely what you could potentially grow within the city boundary. And the answer is quite surprising. You can actually grow maybe 4 times the current per capita footprint of commercial horticulture in the UK. All right, we're probably not going to do that tomorrow. That would involve digging up Endcliffe Park, using everybody's gardens and covering roofs and so on. But at least, there's a significant potential there. When even more shit hits that fan, we can grow quite a lot of food in Sheffield. Is greed good? Another Bojo quote? No. Evolution? Is evolution the survival of the fittest? Well, yes, but the fittest in a social species, we're a social species. Who are the fittest? There's those who are most social. In human terms, the most ethical. That's a quote from one of my favorite authors, Ursula Le Guin. Come and help out, be a bit more social. You can find more details on my website, on a website called unphone.net. And the slides URL is there, tinyurl.com/Ponics2021. And I hope that wasn't too much over 20 minutes, 10 minutes.
That was great. That was pretty much spot on, I think, actually. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was fantastic. And it sounds like we have a conversation to have potentially for future. Yeah, we've just moved into a new building, actually, if you didn't know. So there's lots of potential for new exciting things at Food Hall in the future.
No, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, maybe I'll get in touch. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, I again just want to say like how different obviously those two talks were that we just heard, but how it all relates into this same idea of trying to create a sustainable, just food system in Sheffield in a myriad of different ways. And yeah, what I'd like to do for the rest of this session up until about 7 o'clock or however long people are happy to stay for, is to think broadly about this idea of academia and practice, and how we can sort of relate to each other. So I have a couple of like little warm-up questions for you. I don't know most of the people here. I know a couple of the people here, and it'd be really great to get a little bit of input first of all. So what I want to ask you to do is to first of all have a think about in your life generally, like in whatever it is that you do in your job, maybe for some of you this won't be applicable, but as a practitioner of something. So for me, working for food hall, like how much of what I do, how much of what you do, how much of what I do is informed by some kind of scientific basis, or what you think of as having a scientific basis, I suppose, or what is it that you do, as Nicola was saying before, just because it's always been done. So what I'd like to invite you to do is, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is what you do is just what you do because that's always what you've done or because you thought it up, but 10 is what you do is very informed by science and it's all very rigorous. Or I suppose here I'm using the word science where we've been talking about academia, but informed by something that has come about through the scientific method. Yeah, so I'd like to invite you to sort of try and, if you can, put that in the chat. And maybe if it doesn't relate to your work, if it relates to a significant part of your life, or perhaps the reason that you're here at this talk, yeah, where would you place yourself on that scale? I'm just trying to see more of the chat. Okay, so do we have to give a reason? I mean, you've predicted my next question, really. I would kind of like to ask for a bit more of a background from some of these more extreme ends, because I imagine that there's people here from different fields and different sorts of things that you're doing. So maybe I'm going to pick on you, Ruth, because you seem to be offering to give a reason. If you'd like to speak up and sort of explain what your for means, that would be great. Or if you're not willing to speak, maybe type it in the chat.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me? I don't know, because I'm an architecture student, and like when you say science, I assume you mean like theory and stuff, or like writings that people have given, but it's not so much like the scientific method, it's more just what they have done before. So we're not encouraged really to do exactly what people have done before as well, because then you're not producing anything new. So on the lower end.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. I wonder if someone who had a really high number wants to speak. Someone put an 8. Who was it? Charlie. Would you be willing to justify your 8?
Yeah. Hi. So what I recently started, I work for a company who arrange events for doctors who treat neurological disorders. So the events are all about how they care for them and how they can care for them better. So I don't actually do anything academic, but the work's very related to it, which is, yeah, why I put a high.
Great, that's really useful. Yeah, I suppose what I was hoping to gain from that exercise was just to get an idea of like the range of different things that, you know, things are going to differently require academic input, I suppose. And it's interesting, yeah, what Hamish has put in the chat is that there's so much science in the world. There's like so much science in the world, and yeah, I read in it, there's a good, maybe I'll try and share the link actually, a good blog post that Julian Dobson wrote that's something about like, do we need any more evidence? Because there's especially in the political sphere and in policy making, there's just so much evidence for things like being good, but it doesn't mean that they happen. It doesn't mean that they like get legislated or get funded or whatever. And so maybe it's like thinking about yeah, how that evidence is applied and stuff, I suppose. So I'm just going to move on to my next question, which is again a similar contribution in the chat. And so I suppose I'd like you to think, if you're here and you're someone that's involved in academia, I'd like you to think, is what you do directly applicable to people in the real world in fields that are related to what you do or otherwise? And if you're here and you're not an academic, do you think that there are out there academics who are doing something that relates to what you do that you could learn from? So yeah, this kind of relationship between academia and practice, I suppose. So yeah, I'd like you again to put in the chat a 1 if you think that what you do has nothing to do with academia, a 10 if you think that there is out there somewhere someone who could tell you what to do, or could advise you, or could give you some background. So let's see. Okay, this is good. This is what I wanted to happen, not to sound too Machiavellian. But I'd say on the whole, these numbers are higher than the numbers that we previously had, right? And there was a lot faster responses. People just coming out with, you know, everything. I don't think there's anything below a 5, is there? No, nothing below a 6. Oh, there's 5. Yeah. So yeah, I guess what I wanted to suggest with this is that why is there this difference? Like what barriers exist that stop this transfer of learning between academia and between people who are doing things in the real world? Because this is really, I suppose, what I wanted this session to kind of think about was generally, but in terms of our food system in Sheffield as well, like why is there all of this research that happens in various different fields in Sheffield, but why does it seem that it's difficult for it to permeate into the practice that we do, even next door to, you know, next door to the university? And so I'd just like to, if possible, invite comments on that. You don't have to think specifically about the Sheffield food system, but if you've got some thoughts about this this permeation between academia and practice, it'd be really great to hear from you. So feel free to speak up. Ollie? Yes, please do.
Hi. Yeah, so I think one of the difficult things around all this kind of stuff is the issue between when communicating, especially with the way that you deal with modern news, is the sort of, not clickbaity, that's not what I mean, but these organizations are run as businesses. And there's often like if you look at the local newspapers that are currently available, there's a lack of like, it doesn't funnel into the public discourse per se. People are subscribed, or people listen to certain voices that they trust and they have an opinion of. And it's very difficult for them to sort of go outside of these voices and go outside of and look for these things. In many ways, it's a privilege in your life if you're able to spend the time looking and reading for things that might be able to help you or help others. Most people simply don't have the time to, you know, put 20 30 minutes, you know, every day to go through like the news cycle or like look for local news or read academic papers, especially when you have within academia a lot of journals gated sort of with public knowledge. It's not able for people to just go and have a look. They need to have some foot in that academic system, or they need to have had, you know, to subscribe to these journals, and that costs money. So I think because knowledge, people sort of are entrenched in tribes, and then moreover than that, there is a price put on knowledge, it becomes quite difficult for that information to filter out in a meaningful way, and perhaps even more difficult when we're in a pandemic and you can't just have these discussions sort of with people in the street or within organizations. You're getting even more entrenched into those fields of knowledge production within newspapers or academia than you would have done meeting other people. That's my thoughts.
That was very eloquently put, and I really appreciate your coming in on that, because it's very true. And I just earlier actually had a workshop about critical pedagogy, which I guess is this idea of like thinking about people being educated less as like the education system that we have, and thinking about education as a expansive lifelong thing. And maybe because we think about people having to go out and seek knowledge in order to practice things, that whole that philosophy is flawed, and we need to have more of a conception of like people being learning entities throughout their existence, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think often with knowledge, it's only a lot of people still live in their own academic silos. You have a situation where knowledge is the co-production of knowledge and interdisciplinary working in many cases is still quite new. And although research councils are very much pushing, increasingly for interdisciplinary work and moving forward on that, which can be really appreciated, there's still a lack, I think, of pushing the knowledge produced within this interdisciplinary learning and going forwards. Yeah, I also agree with what Ruth's saying there. Like, people can seek out these things, but I think there needs to be a greater work on making knowledge more palatable to the greater public, at least in some sense.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. Is anyone else? Oh, Nicola.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I suppose it follows on from what I was kind of talking about earlier on, but I think in academia, we are also completely subject to these problems of the existing systems have always been this way, and so therefore we can't break out of them. And it's just like this kind of self-fulfilling downward spiral. You mentioned Julian Dobson and the work that he was doing. I worked on that same project with him, and it was really interesting because we were trying to see how you could get some of that knowledge from academia out and into practice. And the format of the academic sort of outputs, our books, our journal articles, were a problem. There's no doubt about it. Not very accessible, but it was also interesting hearing about how there was sometimes this idea about, that's a great idea, love it, we've got no money to do that, great idea, it just wouldn't work here. And again, it was that sort of almost that no, computer says no, or we couldn't possibly. But I suppose it's that trying to allow for the space, the headspace, the time to do some, well, to allow a thinking process to see whether something else is possible. And sometimes there isn't even that time to have that space, and that is where academics are lucky. We can do some of that thinking time between all the bits and pieces that we're also doing, but thinking is not, it's not the problem, but it is a problem for people in practice. They're just often, again, it's that goes back to that idea of capacity and what capacity there is.
And then also on what Nicola was saying there, like, academics should already live a life where you have a certain amount of credits that you need to fulfill in teaching hours, and a certain amount of credits you need to fulfill in, producing your own research, and having a situation where you don't have the time and, like you said, let alone the funds to put that information out, be it off your own back in, say, a perspective of like a YouTube channel, like was mentioned in the chat, or Twitter or anything like that takes time and effort as well. And I think that within academic departments, there's lecturers often or researchers are expected to produce and put their own work out there for themselves. And oftentimes they aren't equipped to do that. That's not their job role. That's not what a researcher was taught to do. And so not having anyone to make that knowledge, take it from an academic paper and then present it publicly, because there's no funding, increases that issue of within knowledge being sort of just kept in its own silo.
I'd like to invite anyone else, if you've got any comments on this, feel free to turn your mic on.
Hello. Can you hear me? I've got headphones in, so I can't tell. Cool. I think sometimes it's a case of people don't want to know. So, you know, like things like vegan bashing in the media, it's, you know, it's that kind of cognitive dissonance of, we know that the people who are eating vegan or more plant-based are making sustainable options, it's better for animal welfare, but we're going to bash them because we feel bad about ourselves, maybe. But yeah, it also comes down to clickbait, really. So I work in nutrition, so you find a registered dietitian on Instagram, see how many followers they have compared to, don't know, Deliciously Ella or someone like that. It's just, yeah, so it's where people are getting the information from, what's appealing to the masses. And yeah, you know, I'm bound by evidence-based science in what I say in my job, but someone like that can just say whatever they want, you know, like Gwyneth Paltrow and people like that.
So I guess just to try and like summarize a bit, what I'm hearing is that no individual person is at fault for any of this. It's just the system is flawed, and therefore we need to build a whole new system. Easy as that, right?
Yeah. No, it's just what is important to people, and sometimes it's not important to people. They don't need to know, they don't want to know.
I suppose as well, if you get, I've never been in this position, but I suppose if you are an academic and you are talking to the media, they will really, you know, specifically kind of focus on, you know, where's this evidence from? Is that same questioning going to the likes of Gwyneth and you know, other kind of, I don't know, the various social media people, but is that same scrutiny being applied to them as well? I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying that it necessarily should it, shouldn't it? I don't know, but I suppose that, yeah, the system is different for different people in it, I suppose, or different, yeah, depending on their position. And just from what Beth was saying, I don't know whether people are taking are they taking the advice, but they're not scrutinizing it like it would be when you're giving that advice as well, perhaps. Don't know.
Yeah. You constantly get people going, oh, I've read that blah 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 blah, and you say, oh no. That's not true. I'm following the cabbage soup diet for this and this. I've got stomach ulcers and plenty. You're like, no. Yeah, so people do just sort of pick and choose what they want to hear as well, don't they? Nothing wrong with that. That's their choice.
I suppose also there is that element of traditional news media still. Academics still play within the rules that have been sort of put in place for the last however long, and there's still maybe within these entrenched areas of where knowledge is being produced, they still haven't fully reacted to these new, in many ways, celebrities producing knowledge, and still afford them the role of celebrity influencer as opposed to the idea of person producing knowledge, person who should know what they're talking about, and that not having that sort of boundary between the two of them causes problems and gives them a more widely reaching voice and a less criticized voice in many ways, which I think is again part of the problem. Academics still play within those set roles that people have had for a long time.
Yeah, I wonder whether like academics and like academia maybe like has to become a bit more clickbaity in a sense, because like just to make them, obviously that's really hard when what you're trying to do is science, but just on sort of like a lower level, just to make it accessible to people who don't know the ins and outs. I think that's something that academia struggles quite.
So it's like Hedgehog Wars, yeah.
So I'm just wondering, we'll probably draw into the end really now, because I've got a few things I'd like to say before we finish, but I'm just wondering if anyone wanted to try and make any final comments that kind of draw this conversation back towards this food system in Sheffield that we have. And like I was saying, yeah, we've got these two massive universities that do loads of research that can in various ways be applied to what we want to do, and hopefully the reason that most of you are here is to build this this sustainable just food system. That's kind of my tagline at the minute: a sustainable just food system, and how to make that happen. Yeah, so I just wonder if anyone has any comments, pearls of wisdom, magical solutions to how we can draw these seemingly at the minute relatively disparate elements together. And if not, that's also fine.
I think on like one thing there is universities. Like I know that Food Hall has recently started doing some work with the Geography Society at Sheffield. These universities have huge resources in terms of student numbers, and I think that there could be a better utilisation of the volunteering capacities within both universities and community engagement in order to utilise a lot of labour, money and time, as long as there was more of a co-working between the university bodies and these bodies like Regather and bodies like Food Hall.
I totally agree with that. I think it would take some coordination, but I think there's no reason why that sort of thing couldn't happen. I'm always very flippant with my potential dissertation students that I have every year, and I'm always trying to throw different topics at them. But wherever that can be connected up with local organisations and what they could be interested in, so that something can be produced which is helpful for them. It's always going to be variable. It's always going to be, but I think the key is knowing that that is possible in the first place, and sometimes just that knowledge isn't there. One other thing I just wanted to mention, we're and it's slightly related. I don't know whether it is or not, but one thing we found is that when we were trying to find out what some of the barriers are between practice and academia, it was that the academic department or the website or whatever isn't the natural place that people might go to. It might be another NGO somewhere that might be acting as a kind of a networking organisation. So in my field, for example, that might be someone like Keep Britain Tidy, just because they are, all the parks departments in the country are hooked into that. So rather than us trying to come up with some accessible hub of lots of easy to digest academic summaries, which is what we're trying to do, doesn't make any sense for us to hold them at the Department of Landscape in Sheffield or somewhere in University of Leeds. Probably makes more sense to hold them with somebody else who does that kind of thing, that's more their bread and butter. And so I think it's a more outward facing sort of activity that doesn't come naturally to us as academics at all, and but I think it probably will be having to do so going forward. Who drives that, I don't know, but I think it would be good if it happens organically, just through things like this. And so
I'm conscious that it's now 7, and I don't know about you guys, but I've not had my tea, and I'm getting hungry. So I'm going to close us up. If anyone's got any final comments and you want to put them in the chat, I'd really appreciate that. Like I say, I'm going to save the chat and share some bits afterwards if people want that to happen. So yeah, if you want to put your email in the chat and I can share some things with you, then please do. You can message it to me privately, or yeah, whatever you feel comfortable with. And yeah, I'd just like to say a few closing things. Basically, yeah, this whole series of talks, I say series, this is the second one. This series of talks, the idea is to just like bring like-minded people together and to sort of be thinking about the Sheffield food system in a bigger way, in a broader way, because there's loads of stuff going on in the city at the minute. There's so much stuff, and it's just not necessarily very well connected up. And I know that Chef Food have done a bit of that kind of work. There's various things that have happened, but yeah, I feel like, from my opinion, from my position being at Food Hall can actually act as a pretty good hub for connecting all these things up, because it has all these different has all these different aspects, as being a social eating project, hopefully soon a food growing project. There's loads of different things that we do at different levels, and yeah, I just really like to try and utilize that as a way to connect people up all over the city and to help us feed people and to keep people happy and safe. And that'd just be wonderful. So yeah, that's where this whole sort of series of talks has come from, that idea really. And so I'd like to invite anyone who wants to be involved or has any ideas or in whatever capacity to yeah, feel like you're able to do that. Like if anyone has an idea for a subject for one of these talks that you'd like to put forward, if you know someone who you think might be a good speaker, if you would like to get sort of more involved in the organising in terms of yeah, just working with me to do that, it would be really great. And feel free to yeah, drop it in the chat. I'll type my email in now if you want to email me afterwards. Sorry, I can't really type and talk at the same time, so I'm just going to chatter on endlessly. There we go. And yeah, so that's sort of my shout, is to get involved if you want to. I'm also going to shout about what Food Hall is doing right now. Obviously, it's been a pretty tough year for everybody, but Food Hall is getting back on its feet. We're moving into this new building. We've opened up the takeaway cafe 2 days a week, so you can now come down and get a hot meal to take away on a Tuesday or a Friday. We're still doing loads of volunteering in the kitchen, volunteers to run the takeaway cafe. So if you're interested in getting involved in any of that, all the details are on our website. And I also was going to spend a couple of minutes talking about all the amazing work that other organisations in the city are doing around this kind of stuff, but it's nearly 7:05 and I don't have time. But all I'm going to say is there's a million different organisations around the city really involved in this kind of work. And if you're interested, drop me an email or just Google it, check them out. Yeah. And finally, I'm super grateful for you all giving up an hour of your evening to be here. Thanks very much to Nicola and to Hamish for giving those talks, and to everyone who's been involved in the discussion. And I will say good night.
Thanks for organising.
Thanks, really enjoyed it. Thank you.